What's up, everybody? It's Wincey Terry-Bryant, your host for the Arts IgnitED podcast, an extension of NJPAC's Standing in Solidarity program developed by the Arts Education team. Our experts light up the mic with honest conversations that welcome social justice topics into the classroom and spark change in any learning space. Welcome to Arts IgnitED Season 2. Today's guest is Lanou. Hey, that rhymes. A special educator, consultant, and staff developer who's passionate about creating inclusive, strengths-based classrooms for autistic students and all kinds of learners. Aaron spent years leading the Nest Support Project at NYU, helping schools across New York City and beyond design successful inclusion programs. He also works with Team Social Stories. I want to hear more about that. Collaborating with educators around the world to make learning more engaging and supportive. Aaron's work is all about helping teachers see every student's strength and building classroom communities where every learner can thrive. Wow. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks so much, Wincey. Really happy to be here with you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Yeah, I'm really excited. I want to hear more about all of that. But I just want to jump right in and talk about how your work centers on strengths-based inclusive practices. Can you talk about what that term really means in like the day-to-day life of a classroom teacher?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of my work is about both those things, inclusion and a strengths-based approach. And I see inclusive education as being about creating equity and access to education for all students, really all students. And that's regardless of, or often even like in consideration of aspects of their identity that might have otherwise led to their exclusion from school. And so that could be related to their cognitive profile, their neurotype, their disability. It could be related to race, obviously, to social class, like factors that have historically and sometimes still exclude, segregate students from an educational experience. Combating that by making sure that we're designing spaces that consider the needs of all kinds of kids so that they can be successful and thrive in schools. And that involves a lot of things, and I'm sure we'll get into what those things are, but that involves sort of a systemic approach in schools and districts that involves like a set of beliefs that enable that work to happen, that sort of drive that work, and it also involves a lot of actual sort of practices and pedagogy to make sure that comes alive in the classroom. And the strengths-based part of it, again, it's beyond just like not deficit-based. I think a better way to think about strengths-based education is that like students' strengths are the starting point. Like we begin by looking at what kids can do, and we build on that, right? And we leverage students' strengths in the classroom just because, but also to help support the areas where challenges do arise. And I guess, that's just like defining the term, sort of knowing what we're talking about. But your question was about like, what does this look like for a teacher in the day-to-day? And I hope, like when it's going well, it means that like that structural piece is in place and teachers have students with disabilities in their classrooms, because sometimes that's the stumbling block. They also have support, training, resources, coaching, so that they feel competent and like know what to do to support a wide range of learners. Also that like their thinking, teachers' thinking is sort of maybe different than how they were trained originally, but they think about their role as being someone who is there to reach all kids, kind of no matter what's going on. And that requires doing things a little bit differently and using tools and language and practices that like help create conditions where every kind of kid can really feel a sense of belonging and ultimately learn in their class.
So that's so great, because when I first was reading about your work, I was wondering if teachers or educators or listeners might be thinking, well, if they're in the classroom, then they're automatically included because they're in there. Yeah. But what you just explained and described sort of speaks to how somebody could be in a classroom and not feel like a part of that group.
Yeah. Inclusion, a lot of inclusion advocates, people who do this work talk about inclusion going beyond being a place. It's a set of services, it's an approach. And sometimes my dear friend, my former boss, my mentor, Dorothy Siegel, who was one of the sort of innovators of inclusive education in the New York City public schools and who started one of the co-founders of the NEST model, she talks about her early work in sort of researching special ed in New York City schools as being what she called the drop and pray method of inclusion. Well, the kids in the room, we did our job, right? Our work here is done. We got a kid with an IEP in a classroom, therefore inclusion is happening. It's not that simple. Yes, they need to be in the rooms, and sometimes that is the problem. But once they're there, how are we making sure that classroom is set up so they're going to be successful and they're not constantly overwhelmed, triggered, left behind by the way that routines and instruction happen in that space.
Yeah, that's really important. Can you talk about how your PDs kind of help with the thought processes of people who may not have this as an experience yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing teacher professional development for a number of years. I do it sort of on my own now. It's how I got connected to NJPAC. We've been doing some great work together for the past 2-3 years. But I also work a lot in the New York City public schools and beyond. I've done a fair amount of work in Denmark, sort of in the service of the same work. And before that, I was with the NEST team at New York University, the group of folks that provide the training and ongoing support to teachers in the New York City public schools NEST program. And I think one of the things that I've always been challenged by, but it's like a challenge I love, is the sort of mix of providing folks both with the tools. Like, people need to know what to do, and if you don't know what to do, and you go to a great sort of fluffy but inspiring training, and then you get back to the school the next day, you're likely to sort of revert to the known. That's what we typically do. It's hard to sort of shift habits that we've developed. So people need to have tools and need to know what to do. But in order to use those tools, know when do I use a visual support or not? Or is this the time to maybe encourage a student to, take a break? And how much do I offer that versus let them make the decision? All the where the sort of rubber meets the road of why you use the practices you use and the way we think about this, and to be able to see that it's sort of maybe different needs that some students have, it does require a shift in mindset. And that, I think, has to be a part of professional development, of training, of all kinds of support to teachers. It's not, it's not finger wagging, you'd better do this kind of work. It's sort of opening folks' eyes, I think, a little bit, offering a perspective that maybe they haven't been exposed to before, to get them to kind of see, understand, how different kids' brains and bodies maybe work a little different than the kid next to them, and what that means for why we do our jobs a little differently.
I love this work. I love what you're doing. I want to know, what made you take this on? What made you say, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to become a crusader for this. I'm going to travel, not just the country, the world. I'm going to go to other countries. What made you say, somebody's got to do it, so I'm going to be the one?
Yeah. Well, I really feel very lucky in that I have multiple points of my life that I've been exposed to this work that I think many people just don't. And through no fault of their own, I just sort of happened into this in many ways. I grew up with a mom who's a speech therapist in my, local public schools. And she was a huge advocate for her students. And I would hear her talk about how she had to kind of push and fight for making sure that her students were included in schools. It was just when you're 8 and hearing your mom talk about, I've got to make sure that the student that I work with who has Down syndrome feels comfortable in the class and the teachers know what to do. It sort of, I think it planted the seed pretty early for me. And I also, when I decided to go into special education, I was at a great program where I got my master's at Hunter College, the CUNY system here in the city. And one of my early classes was inclusive education. It just was the name of the class. It was sort of, and it was both practices, but also the thinking behind why this is the approach to take. And I found my way to the NEST program that we've spoken about. I taught in the NEST program for a number of years and was very lucky to be in it in the early days, meet a lot of people, meet Dorothy, who I mentioned, and a lot of other fabulous colleagues who are teachers and speech therapists and occupational therapists and social workers that were doing this work and figuring this work out. And then when I had the opportunity to join this really fabulous team at University that was doing the professional development for the NEST program, that's when sort of everything sort of came together about like, I think I got although I missed the classroom, I think I got enough teaching chops to really get what this work takes and requires and what it feels like to do this differently. I hope that what I can offer in a role of providing, support to educators is the ways we make these shifts and the techniques and practices that work, but also like we keep talking about, like how we think a little differently and how that's going to inform what we do in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. What I appreciate is that you are telling us what it looks like in practice, and then you are also giving us like tools. So you said it's not the finger wagging. It's not just going and doing these keynotes where you tell people you need to, without showing us how to. And that's so important because if we're talking about the way people process information, it's challenging if you don't have that, like experientially, if you don't know how to, and somebody tells you you need to or you ought to, then how? Like, what do I do? So I have teachers listening, I know, and they're like listening for tools, and you are already like dropping pearls. Let's talk about visual supports. Like,
okay,
their visual supports, like student interests. Tell us how teachers can use like classroom routines and what can they put together? A teacher who's listening right now, give us like a do now, like tomorrow in your class, consider this.
Yeah. I think visual supports are a great place to start. I think, I try to offer practices that are aligned with what's called universal design for learning that I imagine many teachers and educators are familiar with, but may or may not be. UDL, it's often abbreviated as, is sort of an approach to thinking about education that sort of takes a big step back and encourages us to recognize like the norm is variability. Like that's the norm. And therefore, because humans are different from the person next to them, we sort of have a responsibility to design both the environment and also our instruction in a way that considers them and their needs, the variability, the natural variability that exists between, kids and humans. And I think that, the work comes out of universal design and architecture, where if you're designing a building, a plaza, a physical space, architects have to envision who's going to be using this space and how do I design it accordingly. You don't just make this, wonderful, tall building and, it only has stairs. So I wasn't thinking about the fact that there's going to be wheelchair users, or let's say someone using a walker, or someone who has a child and therefore a stroller. Like I wasn't picturing those people being in this building, and so I designed it without them in mind. Universal design and architecture sort of it urges people to think of all the various kinds of humans who might be using a space and design it accordingly. Universal design for learning asks us to do that with thinking about our educational spaces, our classrooms and schools. And so visual supports, that's sort of a big preamble to say that like visual supports are UDL aligned, like they can be really powerful and useful. We also just need to make sure that, we're not using visuals as the one and only tool we use, and we end up with a student who is blind or vision impaired, and that isn't accessible to them, right? There's no one practice. No practice is like truly universal. We need to make sure that we're like offering options and choices in an inclusive classroom so that all students can sort of find their way in and connect and understand the instruction and our directions and everything. So all of that said, I do think visuals are a good place to start. I think visuals can concretize things for students. So like, it can be as simple as like, I've told kids 100 times, you turn in your homework into this homework bin, but like there's no sign. It's mid-October now. Some students have kind of gotten into that habit and some haven't. Like, why not a poster with a big arrow, homework bin, that just points to it, right? And maybe at the beginning of class, you even have an image of that poster on your, like, a lot of people use slides, smart boards, Promethean boards these days. You have that image up. Don't forget to turn your homework in to the homework bin. And it's color-coded because the bin is the same color. Like, things like that just make the expectations clearer. There's less guesswork. And for students who may have a little bit of a higher need for like predictability and structure and clarity, that's going to be like the thing that makes a difference if they can follow that routine. But like I like to say about a lot of inclusive practices, like, it's not going to hurt anybody to have that color-coded basket, that image there, that big arrow. Like, it's just there as an additional support for people for whom that is like necessary, right? And though I need to use visuals more because one of the best uses for visuals, I think, is to replace verbal language. I'm a talker, as you can probably tell with my 9-minute long answers to your questions.
You're great. I'm loving it. I'm loving every bit of it.
Yeah, but visuals can be a really good way to replace verbal language. We like talk a lot at kids in school, and they expected to like remember the stuff and the directions and the reminders. And by replacing some of our language with a visual, even if that's, a little icon that shows a raised hand, and we hold that up in a lesson when we are telling kids it's time to raise their hands and ask questions or respond to the prompt or whatever it might be. Like, holding up that visual saves our breath, like allows kids to focus. They can see immediately and quickly what the expectation is. And so simple things like that can help, again, with clarity and concreteness, but also like help us sort of, not have to constantly be chomping on Ricola all day long because we don't have to talk as much when we share a simple visual that clarifies exactly what we're expecting.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. I love this because it's accessible. Like, what you're offering is accessible. Every teacher listening to this, every teaching artist has got to be saying what I'm saying right now. Like, wow, I can do that. I hope
so.
That. Yeah. That's it's simple. It's accessible, and it's like an ongoing conversation. So there'll be things that we discover as we go along. And I know you're going to share your website. Everybody who just joined us, I'm talking to Aaron Lanou, and he's just dropping a lot of science on how we can make our classrooms more inclusive.
There are like simple but very powerful practices that I think if we just become more in the habit of using, we don't even have to think about it. It doesn't feel like extra work anymore. We sort of lift the level of how our classroom is functioning. It's more designed for all kinds of kids than it was before. It doesn't mean, right, there's not going to be challenges, learning challenges, emotional things that come up in the classroom that we then need to sort of brainstorm with our colleagues and problem solve. But it does minimize those things a lot, right? Like, being confused about what's expected of you is not a good feeling. If that's at the root of a student's sort of emotional dysregulation, well, let's make it clear what is expected and have a, visual schedule of what the, today's lesson or session is going to look like. Let's have a reminder on the wall that shows them, are you frustrated? Do you need a break? Here's the process for checking in with the teacher to take a lap or get a drink of water or use this break space in the classroom. And so, the more that we offer these clear visual ways of making the space work better for students, the less we're going to be then sort of reacting to challenges that might otherwise arise.
So great. I'm talking about this being an ongoing conversation because I'm thinking about a classroom teacher, the classroom teacher who's listening to this right now, or the teaching artist, somebody who's, in education and they're thinking, well, I have 100 kids, by the time we change classes and I get all these different kids. So what can I do to, knowing that, the norm is variability, which is a great way to say it. What do I do to learn and explore and investigate how the humans in fourth period think? And I can't figure out how hundreds of kids think. What would you say to that teacher?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of levels we can think about that through. The first is there are some practices like having an agenda posted, like that I just shared. I know it seems like almost too easy, but there are some practices that are really sometimes just that easy that I think really ought to be in place in arts classrooms and other classrooms, all kinds of classrooms, all kinds of spaces, because they do what I just described, right? Like, if a kid is anxious confused, really wants to know what to expect, and they don't have any way to find out, that is a practice that makes the space clearer and more predictable to them. And so I think there's a set of practices, having a visual agenda, breaking down tasks into a couple of steps so you're really clear on what students are doing for, like, let's say a chunk of independent or partner or group work time, so they can follow that along. Making sure there's opportunities for movement, because some kids can sit still for 44 minutes and many can't. And so the work, the masking, like you mentioned, right? The work to try to, like, I'm trying to match the expectation here, it takes so much energy away from the art they could be producing or the math problem they could be solving, because they're focusing so much on staying still when their body doesn't sort of naturally work that way. So I think there are, like, a set of some practices that are not all that hard. They do take, work to, like, maybe create in the beginning, make them habitual. But I think there's a set of practices that are just, like, universal-ish, whole class. This is just how I do things, and it has the potential to help every single student in a classroom, even if you do have 100 kids, right? Like 25 just came in, another 25 are coming in 4 minutes. Many kids are going to be able to benefit from these set of practices. And then I do think there's another level at which, as much as we can, and it's much harder for arts educators in schools who do see, they don't have their students all day long, they see them for chunks of time, maybe once a week even, any opportunities to check in, develop relationships, greet kids at the door, ask them a question while they're doing some work, and find opportunities for connection to get to know kids better. That's such a sort of make or break element of being an educator, is knowing your kids and having relationships with your kids. And I get the reality of how hard that can be, especially if it's like a residency or you're a visiting artist in a school for a short period of time. But just warm-up questions about their lives that you ask at the beginning of a class, like things like that help you just have a little bit of insight, like, I'm gonna park that, pin that, and maybe come back to that. And I think even short of, like, developing great one-on-one relationships with kids, I think finding a way to invite, like, meaningful choice into, like, activities and things kids are creating and working on can be huge. Because if you don't know every kid, because you can't know every kid, like, intimately, but you say, hey, we're going to be, whatever, moving our bodies in a way to represent this idea. Like, I want you to pick an idea that is meaningful to you. If you're really interested in horses, have this be about horses. If you're really interested in Minecraft, make your movement about Minecraft. But, like, actively invite kids to make a choice about what they're contributing and how they're connecting, I think can be huge. Or just, like, choices like, I want this to be a movement thing, but maybe some students aren't as comfortable or don't have the sort of motor control to make their body do what they would like it to do. So, like, I'd love you to do a movement, but if you can't, if you'd rather, if you don't feel like you can connect to a movement to express this idea, I'd love for you to, like, come up with, something visual, or, freeze in place, or have a classmate do the movement. You show them what to do and they'll do it for you. Like, there's giving options for what this can look like, give kids who, again, have this natural variability, like, a path in, right? A way in to sort of meet the expectation in a way that works for them.
So what I'm hearing you say is that those choices and the way we word it and the way we phrase it gives students agency, and it allows them to choose their entry point so that they are comfortable and feel included in the activity. And I think that's so brilliant of you. You mentioned arts educators or teaching artists. So for those of you who are listening who may not know what that is, teaching artists are artists who have, like, a practice, and they may use the performing arts they may teach that art form, or they may use the arts to teach something else. So we may be teaching social skills, or we may be teaching history by having students use their imagination, and we go back into a period of time. There may be like dramatic conventions, or we may use music, or, like Aaron was saying, movement. And so giving students the opportunity to pick an idea that's meaningful and make a choice that they want to demonstrate in any way they choose to gives them the agency to decide how they enter the space and the activity in a way that is most comfortable for them. And we've totally respected them and their choices when we word it that way. I think that's awesome, Aaron.
I love the way you connected and framed that too, because this is where like the thinking work and the doing work have to go together. I like sometimes, as a way to make it catchy, talk about like the M&Ms of inclusive education. And I hand out M&Ms when we do in-person workshops, including some that I've done with NJPAC before. But like the M&Ms to me are method and mindset. Those are the two M's, method and mindset. Method is the stuff, the practices, the visual support, how we offer choice. But the mindset is like not only like that philosophical values-based orientation, like I believe all kids deserve to be here and learn, but like an understanding of what do they need and why and how am I using this in this way right now? And I think what you just described about like this is not, oh, I heard about visual supports, so I'm going to make a visual support and put it in front of the kid who has an IEP. No, this is, I'm going to make a visual support so it's accessible to everybody. I'm not saying, okay, everyone, you're right now going to act like this, but I think this kid can't do it, so you get to do something separate or different. Mm-hmm. It is offering that choice to every single person and recognizing that in this space of beautiful variability that exists in literally every group of human beings, like different people are going to benefit from having a different sort of way in to the experience we want people to have and the learning we want them to do. And so we have to be really clear on what our goals are, right? Like I want students to experience, express, connect, whatever the thing is, but then how we get there can look a million different ways. And when we offer choices, that lets everybody have that agency that you were just mentioning to find a way that like works for them.
Yeah. So I'm excited about your professional development trainings because it sounds like everybody, first of all, I'm thinking about how safe it is to be in a PD training with somebody like you who's teaching other people to make it safe for all the students so that everybody feels included. So I feel like with your PDs, and I know you've been doing them at NJPAC, because every teacher, every teaching artist, every human, it sounds like every person can benefit in like all of our communities, whatever space you're in. If you're in a community center, if you're in a like a classroom proper, if you are in like a theater, like your theater director, if you are in a church, like if you are a pastor, if you're a leader, thinking about all of the different humans that you will encounter and finding ways to make them feel included, and not just included, but welcome. Not just like, we have a section for you over here. That's your section. But like, no, you're welcome into the whole space, and you're welcome for the entire time. Not like wait until we do something that we've designed for your particular level. So I really love that, and everything that you're saying about like the mindset and the methods and the M&Ms. I love M&Ms, so that's great. And you're talking about, so I want to get a little granular for just a second for the teacher who's thinking, okay, well, I have children who have an IEP or they're on some spectrum and they are not social or they don't have the confidence. What would you say? Like, is there an example of an arts-based or some sort of creative approach that we could have a teacher maybe consider that would help foster maybe social connections or self-confidence for a student in their classroom who they say, I don't care what I offer them, they just bow out every time?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I think one of the things, like the starting point is, if you're a teacher and you're thinking, oh, my kid isn't social, doesn't want to be social, doesn't know how to be social, I think we like start there in terms of the mindset work, where we're like, is that really true? Or are we projecting our own expectations of, let's say in this case, non-autistic, neurotypical ways of socializing and interacting on a student who's autistic who might communicate differently? And so if that's one thing, to just like, start with that, like be a little more curious instead of maybe jumping to a conclusion about like, oh, this kid doesn't want to be social, or even doesn't know how to be social. Sometimes we make that assumption, and that's where we're off, and that's going to impact sort of the path we take. So I think with that as a starting point, I think thinking about the arts and the like potential that the arts have for like being a support for students, for helping them like express themselves, connect to other people. Like I think, arts offer this like flexibility and creativity that you don't often get in what feels like a sort of constrained confines of a like academic classroom, so to speak, that have a lot of potential, especially for neurodivergent students, autistic students, and others who are often like creative in ways we might not even know, because the way they express themselves or communicate is a little different. But I would say that choice thing we've been talking about is huge, like inviting novel and different ways to express themselves and connect. And yes, if we're like teaching an arts curriculum, so to speak, and we have to talk about shading and lines, like, okay, we still do that. We still want them to get the learning about visual arts that everyone else is getting. But like, can they do that isn't just making use that skill in a way that isn't just an abstract design that everyone else is doing? They want to actually create some image related to something they're passionate about or they know a lot about or whatever, right? Like allowing ourselves to see the possibilities of what students can sort of do with the work we want them to engage with, I think is a really important starting point. And I think also just making sure that it's the space and the environment and the instruction kind of like works to support students' ability to do that. So like, I love art classrooms in schools oftentimes because there's like amazing construction paper and cool kinds of glue and so many different shades of charcoal-y things. And that's so fabulous. These materials exist and we expose kids to this. But I've been in many art rooms where you walk in and I'm okay, but I can do a scan of the room and be like, oh, wow. Many autistic students I've worked with, autistic people I know, might just like instantly need to get out of this space. It's cluttered, it's disorganized, there's so much like sort of visual distractions everywhere that it doesn't feel like a space that they can sort of be successful in. Or the music classroom is great and kids are really talented or, interested in music, but it's a like cacophony of, dissonant sounds all the time and they don't have any way to either take a break from the room or maybe put in headphones to like muffle the sound a little bit. Like if the space isn't working for them, they're not going to be able to engage and produce and be creative and be flexible in all these great ways to take advantage of what the arts have to offer. So I think we have to follow kids' leads and like allow them to express themselves in ways that work, but also recognize the work that it takes on our part to just like create a space that feels comfortable and invites that kind of work to happen.
That's great, because it's not just about them doing the work that we give them, but we have to do the work to be able to be with them and to make them feel comfortable. And like you said, that requires us being a little bit more curious. And I think that's great. We do a lot of in the work that I do, I spend a lot of time in early childhood classrooms. And sometimes when I walk in, the students will say, I'll say something to, the students we're going around and they'll say, oh, he doesn't talk or she doesn't talk. And the teacher will join in and say, yes, just pass by that one because he doesn't talk or she doesn't talk. So I love that you said that, be a little bit more curious. And a lot of times in the work that we do, we find that they do talk. They will talk. They talk. But when they open their mouth to say something and the whole class has adopted that philosophy that they learned from the classroom teacher that, oh, he doesn't talk or she doesn't talk, it's almost like they remember, oh, that's right, I don't talk because everybody said I don't talk, so I won't talk. But if many times in my, decades of doing this work, those students that they said don't talk, and they talk to me, and then they talk to other people, and then the teacher screams like, oh my God, they talked. So
that's really powerful. And I think the other thing I'll add to that is maybe they don't talk per se, maybe they actually don't use spoken communication, right, as their form of communication, but they can express themselves. They can show, they can use the utterances, they can maybe type or point or direct, use their bodies to it doesn't mean they don't have anything to share and express and convey. And I think that's the really important point too, is that not making assumptions that like, oh, he doesn't talk means he has nothing to contribute. Like, right, is that's a big leap that we have to make sure young kids, but teachers also don't make that connection, right? And one thing, because I know you're sort of like latching onto the about curiosity here, which I think is the perfect sort of like way to think about it. Carol Gray, who I work with as part of Team Social Stories, she developed Social Stories many, many years ago. She has a great definition of curiosity, which she calls confusion with a good attitude. Which I love that reframing, because it doesn't feel, it recognizes that it doesn't feel good to not know, right? We're like, most humans need to have a sense of like, I know what to expect. I know what's going on. I'm pretty clear in what I believe. Not knowing puts us, makes us ill at ease, like makes us a little uneasy. But if you can adopt a stance of confusion with a good attitude. Okay, I don't know, but I wonder. I don't know, but I want to figure it out. I don't know, but I'm going to do some investigating and some research to figure out what might be going on here. It's just it's like an invitation in a way to like lean into our not knowing, so that we actually get closer to something that's real and true and helpful and respectful often.
So good. What exactly are social stories?
So this podcast is 6 hours long, right? I just wanted to check on that, because I'll do my best. Yeah, we're having a good time. No, I'll do my best to sort of summarize it. Social stories are they're a practice that were originally designed to support autistic young folks. They can be used for support all kinds of people of all ages. But they're a tool, but they're also a process to basically help surface some sort of challenge or disconnect or miscommunication that might have happened between people, and sort of offer some information that lends some insight to that breakdown. So, for example, I once had a first grade student who was autistic, who was like, every time we would line up for lunch, he'd like push and shove in line to get next to a kid that he wanted to be near. And I went through the teacher things of like, keep our hands safe, you'll be first in line eventually, all the things, and nothing seemed to like make any headway until like days and days went on, and this was still becoming a challenge, and kids were like, he's elbowing me again. Yes, it was important that he be safe and not sort of push his classmates. What we found out after, unfortunately, almost bringing this child to tears, was that he wanted to be next to this specific person in that line, not just because he liked him, but because he said, if I'm not next to him, then he is no longer my true friend.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's a different thing to be responding to, right? Than pushing in line. And so we wrote a social story that was about basically friendship and proximity. It was like, did you know? Friends are these people that we connect with, that we share interests, and we maybe like, and they like us. And sometimes we're near them and next to them. Other times we're far away. We can be in a different room. We can be in a different state, and they still remain our true friend. Like, that was the social information that needed to be sort of shared, communicated, offered to this 6-year-old, that, guess what, led to no more pushing in line.
Sure.
But it wasn't, again, finger wagging, no pushing, you're breaking a classroom rule, there's a consequence. It was like, wait a second, I'm not understanding something about the reason why this challenge is happening, I, the teacher.
Yeah.
And I need to dig into what is going on and why, and what does this child ultimately need? And he needed a reassurance that his friend was still his friend. Yeah. So social stories are a tool, but also like a process to go through that helps you get to outcomes like that. Awesome. What's really going on? What is really needed? What can I share and offer that might help someone understand something, do something, feel better?
Such good work. Such good work you're doing. All right. So, so my last question, because you have been amazing, and I want you to tell us how we can find you. But before you do that, tell me, how do you stay inspired? How do you stay inspired in this work? Like, what keeps you hopeful about the future of inclusive education?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people in this world, country, city, all the places doing this work. That's a constant inspiration. I follow people on Instagram and LinkedIn and all of the places because I'm just constantly, sometimes you need it more than others. Other times it's just like a happy surprise to see some new idea or practice or training or message that's being shared out there. And it's just very heartening to see that lots of people are doing this and furthering this work. And I'm happy to be like a little bitty sort of part of that. I also am really lucky to like see this work happening in places that I wouldn't usually think of. Like getting connected with NJPAC honestly was a real like inspiration for me to be like, right, I work in the New York City public schools, but also there are performing arts centers and also that have connections to schools that care about this work and want to make sure this aspect of this very important work is supported, and that arts teachers, arts educators, teaching artists, have the tools they need and the insight they need to make sure that their classrooms are working for all kinds of kids. And I think there's a lot of people out there just doing this work. It happens, unfortunately, more so in sort of pockets than it does systemically. But like New York City Public Schools is doing a lot of really good work with the NEST program, with the PATH program, and other commitments to inclusion. I work with this great new middle school that's in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. It's called the Middle School of Innovation, and they opened as a STEM school, science, technology, engineering, and math and arts, but a STEM school for everybody. They are using UDEL as the foundation for their school because they want every kid, no matter where you live, no matter who you are, to be able to come in and access that kind of an education. And I just being around that and meeting with teachers and having great conversations and seeing what they're doing in their classrooms keeps me fueled.
That's awesome. Awesome work. Tell us where we can find you. And those of you who are listening and driving, don't write because we're going to post this on the website, but I want to hear Aaron say it.
Yeah, no, my website is like the primary way I communicate things with people. It's just my name, aaronlanou.com, and I have resources and blog posts and tools and things you can download there. I'm also, like I mentioned, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Instagram, and I like to share, but also see what other folks are doing there. So I love connecting with folks there. I'm also offering like a couple of free webinars throughout the rest of the school year. They're very much in line with what we've been talking about, actually, sort of, they're called the Busting Barriers webinars. Like, what are the things that we're inadvertently doing to make learning harder than it has to be in school, and how can we bust that barrier for kids and use some strength-based practices to help students feel successful in school. And those will be every month throughout the rest of the school year for free for folks.
Aaron, you have been amazing. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing out there in the world. We are just so grateful and just so fortunate to have had this conversation with you. It was so inspiring. Aaron, today you taught us what it truly means to build inclusive, strengths-based classrooms. Your insights remind us that every student brings unique gifts, and it's our job as educators to create spaces where all learners can shine. If you'd like to learn more about Aaron's work or explore resources from this episode, visit njpac.org/PD. And don't forget, you can earn professional development credit by completing this episode survey. Thank you for joining us for Arts Ignited, the social justice learning podcast, part of NJPAC's Standing in Solidarity initiative. Until next time, I'm Wincey Terry-Bryant. Keep creating, keep connecting, and keep igniting change through the arts.